Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Surah Hud, chapter 11, and we will cover verses 110 to 117. Good actions in life replace the ill effects of wrong deeds. There is a verse on it, and I'll go into slightly more detail in this permanent wali. These are the references, and this is our contact in case there is a query or question regarding this presentation or our previous presentations. Recap verses 96 to 109, which I had sent out the presentation last Sunday. The messenger Musa came to Pharaoh and his people with the guidance of Allah. However, they rejected the message. The consequence of this rejection was that they continued to follow the evil path of theirs, which took them to ruin and destruction in this life, and consequently their hereafter was also ruined. The accounts of former nations are noted in the Quran for people to learn lessons from and to obey the laws of Allah instead. Allah does not do injustice to any people. It is people who do injustice to themselves when they choose to follow the wrong paths in life. And we know this is a permanent value. And this is how Quran invites us to look at the affairs of human beings in the world. That who has contributed to wrongs and who is contributing to right. Everything in the universe follows Allah's laws. Only man has choice and intent, and he can either follow his unbridled desires or follow the guidance revealed through the Wahi of Allah. This guidance is now preserved in the Quran for all times. As far as this worldly life is concerned, man has a finite physical life which ends with death. We need to remain conscious of it. And that is important. As students of Quran, we should keep our physical end in view all the time in this life so that we can make use of the time available to us to the best of our abilities. He can live life thinking it will end with death, in which case his self will never develop, hence he will have nothing in the hereafter. And that is an important point. If someone thinks that the life will end with death and lives his life with that assumption in mind, then the question of development of the self or the hereafter does not even arise. Those who make the choice to live life in the light of the guidance of the Quran can acquire a developed self and thus lead a life as defined by Allah in detail in His book and the Quran. Summary of verses which we are going to cover today, 110 to 117. Allah sent His messengers with the book to help mankind remove their mutual differences so that peace and mutual harmony develops among the people, leading to freedom from fear and grief. The messenger Musa also came with the book based on Wahi of Allah. There is only a passing reference in this presentation to Hazrat Musa. However, many people did not take advantage of this and remained suffering from their doubts and inner dissonances. This meant the differences remained in place. And that is an important psychological point. I'll throw some extra light once the verse comes before us. The law of requital continued to bring forth the consequences of the deeds of various nations, which thus suffered due to their wrong conduct. Mu'mineen take advantage of the guidance of Wahi and follow the program of Allah towards the establishment of the system of Deen. Differences become removed. And that is an important point, that differences have to be removed because the psyche, the kind of psyche which we inherit, that has inbuilt differences within it. And those have to be removed through the permanent values and by coming to the Quran. They are cautioned not to make any compromise on the Quranic values. They are told to keep in mind the permanent value that good deeds replace the harmful effects of bad actions in life, and this is the permanent value. Allah then makes it clear to all that if people follow good and keep reforming their society, then they will avoid any destructive consequences in this life. It is people who do injustice to themselves. Let us go to the first verse for today's presentation, 110. Why differences need to be removed. وَلَقَدْ أَتَيْنَا مُوسَى الْكِتَابَ فَاخْتُلِفَ فِيهِ وَلَوْلَا كَلِمَاتٌ سَبَقَتْ مِنْ رَبِّكَ لَقُضِيَ بَيْنَهُمْ وَإِنَّهُمْ لَفِي شَكٍّ مِنْهُ مُرِيبٍ. Before this, we had also stated this in the book of Musa, but a difference was created in it, This is that same self-created difference on the basis of which these Jews are opposing you. If there had been no respite and gradual progression kept within the law of requital of your Rabb, then a decision about them would have been taken long ago. These people, due to this same period of respite, fell into doubt regarding the potential for outcomes as a result of this law and became trapped in a strange kind of inner dissonance. Human psyche and its inner conflicts. So we'll go through some of the points which I have tried to explain in the light of this verse. Here the Quran has again brought out an important aspect of the human psyche by referring to the book sent to the messenger Musa, i.e., the differences arising amongst people which lead to the creation of problems in the human world. This aspect runs throughout the Quranic guidance that human beings who are living life out with the guidance of the Wahi of Allah will always be divided among themselves. Therefore, sometimes we hear these kind of noises that all sects should come together. They can never come together unless they come to the Quran first. And that is the important point here, that without the guidance of Wahi, human beings will always remain divided within themselves, and as a result, they will also create divisions outside. And wherever people come together, we should study it very closely, and that will be temporarily in view of their common interests. That will not be on a long-term basis where the hereafter comes into it. It is only in the case of mu'mineen who follow the Quran that their hearts will be united not only in this life, but they will continue to be united in the hereafter as well. If human beings are content to live with their cognitive dissonances and do not wish to identify and address this state of theirs, then the guidance of Wahi is not for them. How do we detect this in others? So if I am comfortable, for example, with my inner dissonances and my own, I prefer having parties and sex, then Quran will not make sense to me even if I'm reading it day and night. It will make no difference because we'll miss the point. And that is something which we should keep in mind, that we should be fully aware of differences which are within the world in which we live and the human beings who create it. And then also look at the whole system and not get carried away by some temporary benefits here and there, because the issue over here is about the system of Deen and not to suffer with fear and grief in the human world. And we can't do that unless we understand the human psyche, which is working, which has created the world around us. The first step is to find out about this state within each one of us and to be aware of our own cognitive makeup, as this is the starting point to understanding the Quran. Because without effort, we get nothing in this world, and we know it, that we have to get up in the morning, do some work, and in the evening, then we are busy. Some people even work whole of the week, whole of the month. They don't even take holidays. Why do they do it? Because they know at the end of that, there is some kind of a material reward waiting for them. Here in this verse, the Quran has noted the factual condition of human beings who are without the guidance of Allah. He has declared this for all times that they differed in the message of the book itself. And that is important, that they did not want to remove their differences. If they wanted to remove their differences, then they would have come to the Wahi of Allah willingly as and when it is presented to them. Is this not the position of people vis-a-vis the Quran in today's era? Expanding a bit more, as far as the guidance of the Quran is concerned, despite suffering in the world which is created by their intellect and deeds, they continue to have doubts and suspicions about its ability to solve their problems. In verse 48:6, the Quran has summed up the psyche of those people who do not wish to use the guidance of Wahi, as Quran says, Billahi zanna sawi alayhim dairatu sawi. They hold an opinion based on conjecture and evil, and as a result are caught in the sphere of evil and cannot get out of it. If we read this verse and the context of it, it is addressed to mushrikeen and kafirin. And it's very important that people, when they are not very sure about something, they never put in their best. They never concentrate on that. They are never focused on that. They are more concerned about their own interests. And that is where the problems lie. In the concluding part of the verse, وَإِنَّهُمْ لَفِي شَكٍّ مِّنْهُ مُرِيبٍ, The Quran has pointed to two important aspects of the human psyche for not approaching its guidance. Firstly, doubts arise related to the whole issue of needing guidance in life, i.e., why do I need guidance? See here the word used is murid, which is from the root is raib. And Quran says right at the beginning that this is the book in which there is no raib, there is no doubt, and it removes all kinds of human conjectures and the zan and the shak and raib. Why can't my intellect guide me? I do not wish to give up my desires, and I have the means to fulfill these desires within the man-device system. The problems of other human beings are not my problem, period. And this is where the failure of human mind lies, where he or she is not looking for guidance. When they think that problems of other human beings are not my problems, then that means they are not interested to go outside their own self. Secondly, if these doubts are not addressed, then these multiply and lead to further uncertainties in life, making it more difficult to come to the pure Quran, assuming one is interested. If one is not at all looking for guidance, then one is living a life with the assumption that it ends with death, which is a fact in this case. Continuing on the same verse 110, the Quran recognizes the fact that differences will arise due to social interactions between people. However, it presents an external value-driven solution in order to remove these differences, so that fear and grief created by the man-device systems can be eliminated. This is only possible when we bring in the fact that human life at the level of the self continues onwards beyond our physical death. It is only through the acquisition of Iman that we will accept the system based on the permanent values of the system of Deen. Next is, then the Quran makes a statement that the creation of human beings is for a finite period of time. For example, firstly, each human being has finite, limited number of years until physical death. Secondly, the collective life of a nation is also finite under the man-made systems, with everyone being a mortal too. And of course, the whole of the universe also has a finite period in which it is going to exist. And then, of course, things will change in the universe. But that is not our problem. Our issue at this time is, what are we going to do with our life within the finite time available to us? Allah will never interfere in this arrangement, as He has sent the books of guidance and left it to human beings themselves to figure out their differences and the consequences. And then they need to find out solutions using their intellect and reasoning and decide which is the best option for them. If you remember that the verse Quran says that their matters would have been decided. The only thing is they have been given time of respite. And this aspect will be covered in more detail in our presentation next Sunday. Next verse 111, taking advantage of the human accountability. وَإِنَّ كُلَّ لَمَّا لَا يُوَفِّيَنَّهُمْ رَبُّكَ أَمَالَهُمْ إِنَّهُ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرٌ. Whereas it is a reality that the law of requital of your Rabb ensures that full recompense is given to everyone, He remains informed about the deeds of everyone. Accountability is also a permanent value. We have gone through these aspects of law of requital previously as well, but some points to be reiterated. Here the Quran has assured us that each and every deed of ours will be paid back in full, and this is under the divine attribute of Rabb. Because the system of Rububiyyat requires that human beings should be held accountable, because it is through that accountability that Mu'mineen hold themselves accountable and also hold others accountable once the system is established. There are 2 points here. Firstly, this accountability is part of the purpose of human creation in order to help us employ this to establish the system of Deen. I.e., when we become conscious of this as part of acquiring Iman, we focus intently on our own accountability, because our own accountability is the one through which the expanse of our being expands. Our consciousness gains extra space, extra understanding, and that is important. Secondly, we work out the finer details of the system of accountability under the system of Deen. This will have aspects relating to the physical side of the system as well as the psychic side relating to self-development. We value the importance of our short stay in this life and become aware of our latent potentials. And if we pay more attention to accountability, and the best way is to look at our own conduct, our own thought process, we will see that we become more productive as well. We also become more creative because the finite time which is left between today and till the time each one of us is going to die, this is going to make us more conscious of the passing time, number one. Secondly, whatever we have in our hand, we will try to accomplish it as soon as possible. Third, we will always keep that goal of self-development in mind, which goes beyond our death as well. And fourthly, we will also work together with those who are already on this path. And that is how then hearts become united. So there is a lot into it if we keep thinking about the aspect of accountability. It's an extremely positive law which works for mu'mineen. The Quran has placed repeated emphasis on human deeds in order to keep reminding us that without deeds, our self will not develop. Hence, we need to remain dynamic, both physically as well as in the use of intellect and reasoning. Accountability helps to broaden our vision and frees us from cognitive chains imposed by man-device systems. Part of this is to question others as well, and also the belief systems which exist in the world. And this is part of self-development, because the more we think on these lines, the more aware we will become. That means more lively we will become. We will gain extra life within us, and we will also stay motivated. By concluding the verse with Innahu bima ya'maluna khabir, the Quran has provided assurance that Allah is with the mu'mineen and also cognizant of others, and they need to be aware of His presence to draw motivation and energy on the straight path. Further reflections on this verse, 111, statements like Innahu bima ya'maluna khabir, or as in the next verse, Innahu bima ta'maluna basir, should not lead to creating any fear in us. For example, Allah is watching us all the time, hence we should not be caught doing anything wrong or we start to feel vulnerable. Not at all. I picked up this point lately and I said there is something missing over here. So when I paid more attention, I thought that we should bring out this aspect that this whole statement is extremely powerful for mu'mineen, because fearful are those who do wrong. When we are committed to doing right under the permanent values, and we are always looking for ways to develop ourselves, then His presence, His watching over everything is a positive sign for us, number one. And secondly, of course, this is that attribute which we have to reflect as and when the system of Deen is also established. These verses point to the reality of the functioning of the law of requital of Allah, and here three aspects provide us with guidance. Firstly, since we have come to the Quranic guidance willingly without any compulsion, hence the reality expressed here is to strengthen our iman. For example, remember when the messenger Musa went to see Pharaoh, Allah reassured him by saying, Qala la takhafa innani ma'akuma asma'u wa ara. Fear not, for I am with you. I hear and see. So Allah's presence or Allah's being seeing and Allah's being hearing means that it's a positive sign for mu'mineen that they are not going to be left alone. Secondly, whatever we do, being aware of its impact on our psyche helps to expand our view. We are able to evaluate our own daily conduct more critically and closely, and this leads to a better understanding of the Quran. I assume that each one of us is going through the Quran on a regular basis. We will see that these things start filling up the gaps between verses, and these increase our understanding, our ability to understand the Quran more analytically. This vision helps to motivate us to do more solid deeds. Because we have a finite time, if we have certain abilities, certain potential, certain means and resources, then we must utilize them to do good in order to not only to help others, but also to understand the weaknesses in the man-device systems. We can see how much emphasis the Quran puts on doing something and not sitting idle. And that is important. It is deeds which count. If we don't do any deed, then obviously the self is stagnant at that point in time. Thirdly, we become more aware of the psyche of others, and this will help us as and when Deen is established as a system. i.e., to be aware of the finer functioning aspects of the system, not to make it a surveillance or police state, never. A system of Deen will never be a police state, and it will never be a state where there will be a surveillance of everyone. If everyone is trained and educated to be aware of the law of requital, it excludes this whole surveillance thing. It is only those societies do it where people want to subjugate others. Let's go to the next verse, 112. Acquiring firm resolve is a sign of the developed self. فَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ وَمَنْ تَابَ مَعَكَ وَلَا تَطْغَوْا إِنَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ. Hence, you do not need to be apprehensive about them. You and those with you who, after giving up their wrong path, come onto the straight path, and in this way join your Jamaat, should remain steadfast on this balanced and revolutionary path about which you have been commanded. Listen again. Always keep balance and justice before you and never transgress the limits. Allah's law of requital also keeps strict sight of your deeds. A lot covered in this short verse. Few more reflections. After reminding us of the importance of the functioning of the law of requital in the previous verse, the Quran has given an instruction to remain firm and steadfast on this path of Allah. The command is to fastaqim kama umirta. Fastaqim, if we remember, this is the root is from Salat Mustaqim, and even Hayyul Qayyum is the same root. And in this means to remain firm and established and never move away from your own aim of life. And over here, the Quran has already defined the aim of life for us, that is Deen in this world, and of course to continue to keep treading on Sirat al-Mustaqim. The command is to fastaqim kama umirta, remain firm after understanding the instruction of Wahi, and this has two parts here. Firstly, value those who have joined this effort on the path of Allah. Very important. We should never ever reduce value or have any suspicion or doubts about each other. Those who have joined this path, we should have a lot of respect because they are the ones who were looking for guidance and now they are on this path. And of course, everyone takes their own time to move forward, but that doesn't mean that one should in any way criticize them or to have any kinds of reservations about them. Secondly, to always remain focused and to never transgress the divine limits in this striving. The issues noted here are related to the human psyche and are essential for us to bear in mind on this path. Having earlier gone through the accounts of various messengers and their striving on this path, the Quran is now referring to the vulnerability of cognitive aspects which suffer from uncertainty and self-doubts. As we have mentioned in the previous previous presentations as well, that doubts and suspicions do arise on a continuous basis because this is the default function of our brain. But we have to overcome them. We have to first recognize them and then counter them with the values of the Quran. Here too, reassurance is provided by stating, Innahu bima ta'maluna basir. Surely he, that is Allah, sees all that we do on this path. We also need to observe all these verses from the point of view of how the Quran is educating and training our cognitive potentials from the way in which it is laid out. And it is amazing. If we now, after going through and sharing so many presentations, we can see that once we study the Quran and fill in the gaps, the Quran itself, Allah himself is providing education and training and self-development through the Quran. There is a lot we can do even before the system of Deen is established. So this is a big challenge for each one of us, that when we are studying the Quran, we should try to see where there are gaps between the verses and what is the context in which it is being discussed. And if we understand the context, then we can easily fill in the gaps as well. Next verse, 113, be aware of any proclivity to compromise. وَلَا تَرْكَنُوا إِلَى الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا فَتَمَسَّكُمُ النَّارُ وَمَا لَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ مِنْ أَوْلِيَاءَ ثُمَّ لَا تُنصَرُونَ. These people will also try to come to some compromise with you and will desire that you yield somewhat in your stance and that they advance somewhat in theirs, so that in this a compromise is reached. But you should absolutely never do this. and never become inclined towards these people who are transgressing against the law of Allah. If you do this, then you too will be engulfed in the flames of the fire of destruction. And of course, we have to be very vigilant on this, that if we, after coming towards the path of the Quran, we try to go back or transgress or somehow get carried away, then essentially we will join those who are heading for trouble in their life. It is only the law of Allah which is the protector from this destruction. Other than this, you have no supporter and helper. If this support slips from your hand, then there will be no refuge available anywhere. Few more comments on this verse. There are a few important points of guidance here for us. Firstly, recognize what people do. And this is part of being in the picture about others. Here the term zalamu sums up the kind of behavior and conduct we need to be looking for. Those who are unjust and not interested in the Quranic guidance, we need to become aware of them in our daily lives. Secondly, never be inclined towards them, and as a consequence, slacken your own efforts on this path. Mu'mineen adopt a different path of life, while those who elect not to come on this path belong to a different ideology of life. And we have to figure it out, because we live under very difficult circumstances where the man-made system is everywhere and Deen is nowhere. There is no land in which there is a system of Deen. So in a way, we all are pioneers, and those who are pioneers on this path, they need to be extra vigilant. In fact, you have to be vigilant all the time, even within the system of Deen. By not achieving a complete break at an intellectual level from such people, Mu'mineen cannot progress on the path of Deen, i.e., psychologically, this can never provide that strength which is required to advance on this path. Because wherever we slack or we start to compromise, then essentially we have left the path of Haqq and we have gone to Batil. And that is a very risky affair, because all our previous efforts will go to waste. Implicit here is also the warning regarding making any agreement by compromising on any permanent value. The next part refers to the consequence of such half-hearted proclivity towards compromising on this path. Firstly, this world will continue to suffer from injustice, hence will remain in hell. Secondly, self-development will not take place, as this effort will fall well short of the Quranic criterion. So whatever we do on this path, we have to all the time be vigilant about the consequences of our thoughts as well as our deeds. Because once we have selected this path, have come to this path, and Quran is helping us, Allah is helping us to keep treading on this path, and our job is to improve our understanding and strengthen our iman through salih deeds. Verse 114, few aspects of the system of Salaat. وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ طَرَفِ النَّهَارِ وَزُلَفًا مِنَ اللَّيْلِ إِنَّ الْحَسَنَاتِ يُذْهِبْنَ السَّيِّئَاتِ ذَلِكَ ذِكْرًا لِلذَّاكِرِينَ. Very important verse which is covering few important points and a permanent value of innal hasanat yuzhibna sayyiat. For the achievement of this aim, it is essential that you keep on organizing the gatherings of Salaat with great regularity, morning, evening, at night. As a result, society will be shaped along the correct lines, and those balances will become created which will eradicate all those previous imbalances. We should keep it in mind that over here there is some kind of Deen established, and that is why Aqimis Salata has appeared in this verse. And now the next stage of strengthening that state has arrived. So it should be seen in that context. As a result, society will be shaped along the correct lines, and those balances will become created which will eradicate all those previous imbalances. Remember, this is the very technique required in order to remove imbalances, that maximum balances should be created. The harmful effects of destructive acts are erased through constructive deeds. This is that established law of Allah for each one of those nations which wishes to keep the laws of Allah before it. Good deeds replace the bad effects. After setting out firmly on this path together, the next stage is to work for the program to establish Salaat in order to progress further. The timings for this program can be worked out during the day, for example, morning and evening, and also at night. as this program will consume more effort and time as it expands its requirements. Very important that unless Mu'minin meet together and once the system, some kind of an outline of a system has been established, then it becomes more important to meet more often and work out the problems of that new system. And we know that any new system will have horrendous problems and issues because essentially it will be converting from a man-made system into the system of Allah. As it is a program based on deeds, hence it will bring a positive change in society, which will lead to the resolution of problems created by the previous unjust system. There is an important permanent value here to be kept in view for education and training, i.e., constructive actions help to remove the effects of a destructive past. And this is a very powerful permanent value because if we keep that in mind, then we essentially know all the time that whatever is happening and whatever weaknesses are there, these will get removed with the passage of time if we keep doing positive things using the Quranic guidance. And that is why Salih deeds are the ones which bring out our potential, which bring out those latent potentials which we even not be aware of it, but gradually those become manifested before our own eyes. At another verse, 2396, it is stated, Adfa billati hiya asanu sayyat. Repel evil with that which is best, constructive, and balanced. And this is for individual application as well as collective application. We do see in our own word that when we do good to others, then of course it does attract some kind of a favor as well. Though the Quran says that don't expect any thank you for that. But that is the way human world works. Remember, evil can be made to disappear by following the Quranic program together as it helps to bring out the latent potentials in Mu'mineen. Here the verse concludes with the instruction, Zilka Zalika Zikra Lizakirin, i.e., the Quran is meant to help raise human eminence, hence work together. It also means to keep reminding each other as a Jamaat. If we remember that Quran says that this is your own zikr, Quran is for your own benefit, for raising your own eminence. This is part of the process of self-development. Next verse 115, patience and steadfastness lead to success. Wasbir fa'innallaha la yudiyu ajral muhsinin. Together with this, it is also essential to remain resolutely committed to this program. This is because its results will appear after a period of time. This resoluteness can only be achieved if and when you have firm iman in this reality that whichever nation is acting on the program posed by Allah in a balanced way, its striving never goes to waste. And that is important, having a firm iman that our efforts will never go wasted. In fact, the signs start developing within our own self as well as in the outer world in which we are living our life. Its outcomes do take some time to materialize, but its hard work cannot go to waste. It is conviction in this very reality which prevents any faltering in the firm resolve during this patience testing phase. Further elaboration of this verse, we have seen from above that Allah acknowledges the uphill task in front of Mu'mineen. All along, He keeps providing assurance that Mu'mineen need not feel lonely in this struggle of theirs. Once this path is selected by them after using their free volition without any outer or inner compulsion, then they need to keep proceeding in the light of the Quran. It will keep guiding them together. I have put down this comment, inner compulsion. What it means is not mechanical inner compulsion, that I have to do it. I'm fearful of that. That is why I should have Iman. Not at all. This Iman has to be accepted the way Quran has explained to us that if you do not come to this path, then you will suffer under the man-made system. And secondly, you will have nothing in the hereafter because you will never have a developed self. And that is the way human self develops. That is the purpose of human creation. And that is something with which we have to convince ourselves, not mechanically get onto this path. Because if we get onto this Sirat al-Mustaqim mechanically, we can tread for some time, but ultimately people get distracted and leave. And that is not good because we then suffer more because once people leave the path, then they are even in a worse form than previously. Because previously they were ignorant. Now they have some knowledge about the Quran. And that creates a lot of guilt, a lot of inner conflicts and dissonances. Here the instruction is provided by stating, Wasbir fa inna Allah. Be steadfast and patient by taking into account all that is stated earlier. And keep in mind that Allah, with all attributes through His laws, is not going to leave the mu'mineen alone on this path. Keep reminding with all that is noted in the Quran in relation to mu'mineen. And that is important. It is not something we remember one day and we forget next day. Once we come to this path, then we should try to get maximum benefit out of it. And the only way to get benefit is to have sabr and steadfastness, like fastaqim came earlier. So this is part of developing our psyche on these lines. Then the verse declares another permanent value, La yudiyu ajr al-muhsinin, that Allah does not waste the reward, the good of muhsinin who do balanced deeds. The reward of salih deeds never goes to waste. We do not want our efforts to go to waste in this life. Let us expand this aspect a little further. Because if we put in so much effort and the results do not appear, people get discouraged. For example, if a farmer puts all the seeds and everything does, and then his crop is destroyed, then he will be discouraged. He might sell his land and move somewhere else. But in this case, because the deeds or the rewards which we do in terms of self-development are inbuilt within us, so these can't go wasted. La yudiyu ajr al-muhsinin. I have tried to expand it a bit further. This aspect is mentioned in a number of other places. For example, in relation to the messenger Yusuf. If you remember in Surah Yusuf, this is covered in some detail. And the Yusuf, he got established in the land because of following this path. That is, he became a muhsin, and as a consequence, he did succeed and he acquired power to do what Allah wanted him to do. In relation to the messenger Musa, in relation to mu'mineen as well. So this is for all mu'mineen, whether they were messengers of Allah or not, it is of no consequence. What is that? It is a permanent value, which is stated by the Quran for all times. This should be viewed in relation to the acquired loftiness which leads to higher eminence acquired by the human self, i.e. the change which occurs within the human psyche by acquiring the ability to understand the issues of the human world and their solution in light of the Wahi of Allah. Next point is the human self should acquire a higher understanding of the divine attributes and the permanent values in relation to carrying out those duties and responsibilities which Allah has invited the mu'mineen to carry out in the world. Understanding this reality strengthens Iman, and through salih deeds, that is becoming al-muhsinin, gradually those signs appear within the developed self which lead to firmness and patience essential for striving on the path of Allah. Staying together is part of the evidence to which the Quran draws our attention repeatedly. Next verse 116, need to observe the criminal psyche. فَلَوْلَا كَانَ مِنَ الْقُرُونِ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ أُولُو بَقِيَّةٍ يَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْفَسَادِ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِمَّنْ أَنْجَيْنَا مِنْهُمْ وَاتَّبَعَ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مَا أُتْرِفُوا فِيهِ وَكَانُوا مُجْرِمِينَ. After all these details which have been noted above, see what conclusion you reach from the circumstances and accounts of these former nations. To this conclusion that from even among those people whom we used to save from destruction, later on only a few remained who used to strive to acquire their own benefits according to the law of Allah, and used to forbid people from creating imbalances in the land. Here Quran has warned us that don't take it for granted that once the system of Deen is established or once you have achieved a certain higher standard in the society that it will not deteriorate. It will deteriorate because the subsequent people tend to forget and leave the path. Otherwise, the condition of the remainder was such that they kept pursuing their own vested interests by transgressing against the laws of Allah, and they would seize the possessions of others by deceit so that there was no diminution in their personal comforts and conveniences. Never mind what happens to other human beings. And that's a terrible mentality where the human beings develop, that I'm not concerned about others. I'm only concerned about myself. These were their crimes due to which destruction used to descend on them. Further reflection on this verse 116. Moving on from the self-development aspect of the Mu'mineen, here the Quran reminds them about the cause of deterioration in the character of nations. These nations do not go down in a few years. And we have seen those among us who are lived a bit longer in the world, that we have seen deterioration in our world as well, where things have are declining. And right in front of us, whatever little freedom was left, that is also being taken away. Because human beings deteriorate in case they do not have any external standard or a criterion against which they can measure their own conduct. Because there is nothing inbuilt within human beings as guidance. They just follow their desires. Firstly, those among them who have power and influence gradually stop admonishing others, i.e., they do not promote good and forbid evil, which sets in the rot. The cancer starts in the human body from a single cell. And once the cancer has started and we do not treat it, then it keeps spreading. And by the time we discover in the body, it has spread to the last stage where the body then dies. So these are the things to which the Quran draws our attention repeatedly, that law of requital does not spare anyone. So what we need as students of the Quran is to study it, educate ourselves, and then educate others as well. Gradually, over a period of time, the cancer spreads, and if steps are not taken, despite witnessing the spread of visible wrongs in the society, then things deteriorate to the lowest of the low state. Previously, this was that stage where the messengers of Allah used to act as warners, and ultimately a Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen used to form. And they were provided with protection while those doing evil used to be eliminated. And we know the era of messengers of Allah coming into the world has long passed. We got the final book, and the last messengers had left a long time back. So what we need to do is to formulate that Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen, that the community of Mu'mineen, so that we can look forward to help from Allah. However, now with the arrival of the Quran for all times, this task is to be carried out by Mu'mineen in the world. What is the procedure and process outlined by the Quran at a fundamental level for all this? And we have gone through a number of these steps, but it is good to keep repeating them and reiterating them so that we get firmness in our own iman. Continuing, the second part of the verse points to this guidance, i.e., in the first step to recognize these. That those people who do zulm, who do injustices, we have to recognize them in and out. We should know exactly what they are up to in the world. Issues related to injustice and those who promote these wrongs in the society and the world. And we have shared these aspects previously as well, that despite being beneficiaries of any man-made system does not mean that we should accept injustices in the world, that I'm all right, Jack, rest can go to hell. No. If that kind of a mentality then turns the whole world into a big hell, then to dissociate oneself from this state of affairs after understanding this, then intellectually disapproving it, and then to look for alternatives. The recognition of crimes and the criminals is an important aspect of the self's development. In order to do this, we need to look for guidance from the Quran. The question which should arise at this stage is, why do people who are prosperous and wealthy resort to exploiting others? I.e., we need to come to grips with the evil side of the human psyche. They will do it. I just put down this comment, I thought, just to provoke some kind of a thought process, particularly those who are going to go through these slides later on. That why do people do that? And that is an important question. That is an important conundrum which we need to resolve by going through the Quran and by knowing the human psyche. We see this happening in our world of 2023, and the Quran here educates us by pointing to these salient signs and then guides us to Salaat al-Mustaqim. Another permanent value, verse 117, وَمَا كَانَ رَبُّكَ لِيُهْلِكَ الْقُرَىٰ بِظُلْمٍ وَأَهْلُهَا مُصْلِحُونَ. Remember, Allah has never done this, nor does He do this, that He destroys some habitation blindly with injustice and tyranny, while those residing there are such that they are prone to reforming their own circumstances and those of others. And very important, we have gone through some of these verses in a slightly different style, where Quran says that Allah does not do injustice to human beings. It is human beings who do injustice to themselves. Over here, what Quran is saying is that no habitation is destroyed if they are reforming themselves, if they are making efforts to do Amr bil Maruf and Nahi anil Munkar. That is, they are forbidding evil and promoting good. But if they all join up, particularly at the top, then of course they are writing their own suicide note. Third is the arena for testing our own deeds, 117. When the Quran draws our attention to the laws working everywhere in the universe, including the human world, then it essentially invites us to study the laws functioning under man-devised systems. Then the obvious rationale is to compare the two sets of laws, i.e. man-made and those which are put forward by the Quran, and then draw conclusions based on evidence. This should help to make a choice as to which laws will benefit more. If one is the beneficiary of the man-devised system and the life is based on the assumption, conscious or subconscious, that it ends with death, then the choice provided by the Quran has no significance, i.e. even if one is reading the Quran day and night. And that is the state of many people around in the world, that they study the Quran academically. They don't look at it from Deen point of view, because they don't see anything wrong in the world in which they are living. Most of them, many of them, are the beneficiary of the man-made systems. And that is important for us who are keen on the system of Deen and they wish to understand the system of Deen. That are we willing to continue living like that? Because the important thing is that all of us are going to be here for a finite time, which is a limited time, let's say 80 years, 90 years. And after coming to the Quran, let's say we have something like 20, 30, 40 years to still live. So as far as each one of us is concerned, once we are dead, the world is dead, because this world makes no difference to us because we are dead, we have left it. So with that context in mind, we should multiply our efforts individually as well as collectively. And that is the point which this verse is trying to motivate us, that Allah is not going to destroy any nation until the time people over there are reforming themselves. They are making an effort in that direction. There are a few points which need our attention with reference to this verse. Firstly, no people were destroyed until they were adequately warned about their ill conduct. Rabbuka muhlikal qura bi zulmin wa ahluha ghafilun. Your Rabb will not destroy habitations while their occupants were in a state of unwarned. That warning has to come to these people. And of course, now the messengers are not going to come. It is the people who warn each other. And we can see in today's world a lot of intellectuals who have never studied the Quran, but still they are warning their nations, people across the world, that don't do it, your path is wrong. Note the emphasis on your Rabb, the higher understanding achieved by Mu'mineen. And that is very interesting that in this verse, your Rabb, the Quran is addressing each one of Mu'mineen as of today. Of course, at that time, Quran is addressing Rasulullah, but over here now is addressing each one human being who is interested in the system of Deen and wants to learn the Quran from that perspective in mind. Few more reflections on this verse. 2 points to which the Quran has drawn our attention in this verse. Firstly, if any society or nation wishes to have stability, prosperity, and progression in this physical world, then it must not resort to injustice anywhere in the world. Disturbing the balance in a society which is against the requirement of the permanent values of the Quran is gross injustice and is called zulm. And this is a heinous crime, and it is based on evidence according to Allah. Because all these nations, these create wars, conflicts, the civil wars, and they create problems and create economic disparities, create slaveries, manipulate laws, tell lies, and you name it, that every kind of evil, for example, is rampant in the world of today. Secondly, if people who are managing the affairs of any society are making efforts to reform its systems and carry out the task of promoting good and forbidding evil, then they live a life of prosperity and success in the world. This is supported by the historical evidence of the rise and fall of nations. Thirdly, by using these two criteria, the nations can evaluate the time scale of their physical life in the world, as these relate to computing the balance between good and evil deeds. As noted earlier, good deeds help remove the effects of any errors made in society. This should form part of the system of Salaat. Recap of some points from today's slides. Without the guidance of Wahi, there will always be differences between and within human beings, individually as well as collectively. These differences ultimately lead to conflicts, chaos, and bloodshed. These are mainly due to the absence of a higher purpose of life, which is provided by the Quran. Our psyche has potentials for this higher aim. We have gone through this point previously as well, that all those potentials which remain unexplored as we live this life because we haven't come to the Quran, those keep creating problems for us subconsciously as we live our life. And that is part of the reason that people live a life of depression, full of fear, grief, uncertainty, because those potentials are making an effort to come out, should I say, and we do not bring them out because we are totally lost in the material side of this life and we become more or less live a life at animalistic level. Those who wish to strive on the path of Allah need to understand the process and procedure presented by Allah. Firstly, they ought to understand the functioning of the law of requital and respite in the human world. Secondly, having learned and become convinced of the Quranic value system, to never ever compromise on any of these values and to never let the guard down on this path. And this is important because we live in a man-made system and our families around us do not accept the Quran, our friends do not accept it, the countries in which we live, most of them do not want to even hear about the Quran. And those, of course, put pressure on individuals who have come to the Quran. And we should remain aware of it, that Allah is watching all this. He is with us, and that should provide enough strength to keep moving on. Because alternative is to become part of the system, wrong system, and then there is no hope for any reformation. At least there is some hope that reformation will take place at some future time. Thirdly, having joined with others on this path, that is Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen, to organize regular congregations of Salaat to come to grips with the finer details of the system of Deen. Fourthly, as this system is going to replace the wrong setup, hence, remember, constructive deeds replace the evil effects of destructive deeds. Aim and strive to do as much good as possible. That is solid deeds point in this direction. Fifthly, remain firmly on this path and never waver. And that is what sabr means. And never waver in individual and collective resolve, as this is part of self-development, and be firm in Iman. Because if we waver and we detect that we have wavered at some point in time, it is possible, particularly at the initial stages of coming towards the Quran, then that means that we do not have sabr. And that means, having recognized that, we should try to develop that attribute within us. The results of balanced and constructive efforts will always materialize after some time. Sixthly, keep in mind that Allah is a witness on whatever we do, hence never to give up. Lastly, all these relate to strengthening of the human psyche, i.e. Iman. Thanks for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts. You may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of Deen. Thank you.